Picture. You know, last week, these are the Northern Lights. I took these, by the way, last Sunday night. After church Sunday, Susan Kopendreyer came up to me and said, "Jack, do you know that the KP things are for Northern Lights are going absolutely wild?" And I said, "I haven't paid attention because it's all clouds." And if you remember right, last Sunday was clouds all over the place. So I thought there's no hope. And then but she said, "These are the numbers," and the numbers were absolutely sky high, crazy high. So I thought, well, maybe I better try it. And lo and behold, Susan lives up there, so she gets to see that stuff. But anyway, they went off. And, you know, this is one of the pictures I got. But be aware that in the next 2 years, it's going to reach its peak in a big, long cycle. So Northern Lights they should be getting better over the next 2 years, and then it's going to go down again. So I'm just giving you a heads up, because to see the Northern Lights is just amazing. I mean, it's just a powerful experience. I mean, God does this stuff in the sky, and it's just crazy good. A couple other things. I'm the nature nut, so I got to tell you a little bit before I start preaching. Right now, these are the first flowers to come up in the spring in the woodlands. They're very short, they're very little, but it's a snow trillium. They're very short, snow trillium, and they have a good name for that because there's snow whenever they're out there. I took pictures of them last week in the snow, so snow trilliums. But I say that just to remind everybody that in the next 2 weeks, the flowers are going to come out more and more. So if you want to see spring flowers in the woods and get out there to witness springtime busting all over the place, it's going on now. They're up, and it's happening. And if you don't get out there, it's going to be over, and then you're going to say, "Wow, what happened to our spring?" Well, it was there. You just got to pay attention. And I personally, this week it's going to be in the 50s pretty much all the week after Tuesday, realize that for me personally, as it goes 50s, 60s, 70, it's okay to take its time, because if it happens too quick, then it's gone right away. We get to witness about a month of just better and better and better all the time. And the climax after about 2 weeks is going to be the tulips going nuts. Okay, it's going to be, the Arboretum has 50,000 tulips, by the way. And so it's spectacular, and it's fun to see. Also, a heads up that in the next 2 weeks, climaxing on Mother's Day, the warblers are going to be coming through. And this is one of the earliest warblers. He's been around now for at least 2 weeks. And even up in upper Minnesota, he's already there. I mean, they're coming. This is a yellow-rumped warbler. To see warblers, this is my favorite warbler. This is my personal favorite. It's a Blackburnian. But to see a warbler, just keep your eyes open for tiny, tiny, tiny little birds that you would see and say, "What the world is that? I think that's a bird." Get your binoculars out to see them. They're hyper. They're hard to find. But they're beautiful. I mean, look at the colors. Look at the colors on this thing. They're tiny, and you got to get close to see them. But look at this. I mean, just brilliant. This is a Prothonotary. This is a bay-breasted. See, all these different colors on these. There's like 50 different warblers. Keep your eyes open. It's happening in the next 2 weeks. So today, the empty tomb, right? Easter was a few weeks ago, and this sermon, I like to talk about this passage as the perfect follow-up after Easter has come to look at this story. It's like Kyle said, it's the last chapter in the book of John, and we're going to read that chapter. Part of it is going to be on the screen. I'm going to read the whole thing, and you can jump in with the overheads once I get to where it is. But I'm going to start right away, if you got your Bibles, from verse 1. It is a rich and fascinating story, full of interesting details. So as I read this, just listen carefully to everything in this chapter. Jesus appearing to his disciples after the resurrection. It's a great time to look at this story. It's one of my favorites. John 21, verse 1. Afterward, Jesus appeared to his disciples again by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Simon called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish. Remember, they were fishermen before Christ called them. I'm going to go fishing, Simon Peter told them. And they said, hey, let's go too. We want to come along. So they went out, got into the boat, and that night, they fished all night. They caught nothing. And by the way, they would be after a small fish, a sardine. That's what they night fish for in that lake. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, have you caught any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. And these were big fish now. The disciple whom Jesus loved, John, said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off. They were out fishing. And he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. And when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it. Interesting to me is there's already fish on the fire, okay? And some bread. You know, you're dealing with all kinds of things like, how'd those fish get there? You think of questions like, what did Jesus look like? I mean, this is his resurrected body that went through walls. I mean, a lot of things like that. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you've just caught. Bring them on. Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and he did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. And that's as a group. Individually, he did it with others. Verse 15, and that's where your text comes in on the screen. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? And by the way, the more than these, there's debate about what that means. It could be more than the nets, and so I think it means more than these other disciples, okay? Because remember, Jesus had claimed, though everybody else deny you, I will never deny you, okay? I'd never do what they do, okay? So I love, in effect, I love you more than everybody else does, okay? So he says, Simon, do you truly love me more than these? And he says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, number 2. Simon, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And know what the text says? Peter was hurt. He was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself, and when you went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And this was a prediction saying that Peter was going to die by crucifixion, the hands out, so by crucifixion. Tradition tells us that Peter died head down by crucifixion. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, John, who was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" And when Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him? What about John?" Now, interesting answer. Listen. Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return," second coming, "what is that to you? You must follow me." Sometimes we get, what about this? What about that? Jesus says, I'm not going to tell you. It's up to me. You just make sure you're following me. You just make sure you're following. With all your questions, you just make sure you're following me. I'm not going to answer all those questions. You must follow me. Because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that this disciple would not die. But John's writing this. He said, but Jesus didn't say that he wouldn't die, that I wouldn't die, says John. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? And by the way, John was the only one of all the disciples that did not die a martyr's death. I mean, he was boiled in oil and should have been killed, but he actually lived through it and was not killed by it. Verse 24, this is the disciple who testifies that these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. Pretty interesting. Could I have that slide back? The one of the sea, the water. Yep. Okay. This, by the way, is the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus would have spent a lot of his time one-on-one with the Father, and where they would have been fishing and so. And again, you picture them out there fishing. Three things I want to talk about today with you. Number one, just look at the basic scene with me of this whole thing. Just look at the basic scene. Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. Okay? 3 times. He had told Jesus that even if everybody else denies you, I will not. I will be faithful. And Jesus said that, listen to this, as they were sitting around a fire. I mean, they were standing around the fire, warming themselves, and then these people would come up to him and say, hey, you were with Jesus, right? I saw you together with him. You're one of his disciples. And then Peter would say, it's not me. That wasn't me. And Peter would continue to deny it. And, he was said, again, the second time, he said, I am not a disciple of Jesus. And then he says, I don't even know him. I mean, that's what he said. I don't even know this guy. And then the third time, one of the Gospels records that he even cussed and swore about it, that he did not know Jesus. And then the rooster crowed, because Jesus had said, tonight, with your great big claims for love, tonight, before the rooster crows, you'll have denied me 3 times. And when that rooster crowed that night, we read that Peter went out and wept bitterly. I mean, Peter knew he had just totally blown it. Now, there's a fire on the beach. Again, the fire. The fire is like a trigger to trigger that whole scene with Peter denying his Lord 3 times. And it's clear. And once again, you have the scene before you with Peter. Peter remembers that all, obviously. And because Peter denied Jesus 3 times. That is why Jesus asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? Do you love me? And then Peter, hurt, responds, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. It's just a powerful, powerful story and scene. The second thing is this is a story about grace and about forgiveness. It's about grace and it's about forgiveness. You know, the book of Mark. Now, Mark, by the way, was that early gospel. The other ones even used it to come with their gospels from, the theologians feel. But Mark details Peter's denial. He details Peter's denial. Peter was a big leader in the early church. Remember that. The popes traced their authority back to Peter in Rome, okay, as a leader. That's how big of a deal Peter is to the church now and was. Peter was the most well-known leader in the early church, and he was the first leader, head of the church in Rome. According to Papias, who was a 2nd century writer, when Mark wrote the book of Mark, right, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, when Mark wrote the book of Mark, he used the preaching and the teaching of Peter himself as Peter's assistant. They had that kind of relationship. So Mark was the assistant of Peter, heard him preach all the time, took all this together and put it into the book of Mark. So as somebody points out, we have Peter's lowest moment on record for all time. Not because his enemies uncovered this story, not because his critics uncovered the story, but because Peter himself told and retold it over and over again as it circulated among many other churches. Jared Ayers says, why would Peter do this? Why would he do this? And he says, I think it's because on the other side of the cross and the empty tomb, Peter discovered that Jesus is for failures. People like you and I that mess up. John Calvin writes, Peter's fall mirrors our own infirmity. The story told of one man contains a teaching of prime benefit for the whole church. This is about grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. That's what this is all about. That's what it's all about. It's about the freely given, this is what grace is, the freely given, undeserved love of God for us. Grace is abundant in love, forgiveness, and restoration. N.T. Wright says about this passage, he says, somewhere deep inside there is a love for Jesus. Though you've let him down, talking to us, though you've let him down, he wants to find that love, give you a chance to express it, to heal the hurts and the failures of the past, and give you new work to do. You know, I've always found this passage profound, but it meant even more to me after reading a book by Gordon MacDonald called Rebuilding Your Broken World. Again, the name of the book is Rebuilding. Think of the words now. Rebuilding, that's what Peter had to do. Rebuilding your broken world. Starting over. Gordon had been a very famous Christian leader and book writer. I'm an old guy, and I remember his first book. It came out all over the place. Everybody was reading it. I know you don't know it because you're younger than I am. Being married, he committed adultery after he wrote that book. Not before he wrote Rebuilding Your Broken World, but when he Ordering Your Private World, he committed adultery. A large part of the Christian community throughout the world was shocked and hurt. But through the years ahead, he repented. He came back again to the Lord, and he wrote this book about how he put his life together again and about God's work in his life. And this passage, more than any other in the whole Bible, was his focus. This passage meant so much to Gordon MacDonald that if he did that to Peter, he can do that to me. One of the key points he makes in his book is that the church needs to be a community of grace to love broken people. A community of grace to love broken people. In their broken worlds, in an age of much sin and failure and brokenness, in an age in which many people hit the dust, we need to help restore people back again to God, back again to one another. Divorced people tend to especially appreciate this book. MacDonald did not get a divorce. His wife took him back, and now they seem to have a strong marriage. Hope for broken lives. Forgive 70 times 7. A meaningful thing for me is I gave this book out to 2 different people who were unfaithful to their spouses. This is years apart with each one, but both of them, each of them had been unfaithful to their spouses, had committed adultery. And in each case, there was confession and tears, and the marriages were rebuilt. They were rebuilt. And whenever I see them, both these couples are on Facebook with me, whenever I see them celebrate their wedding anniversary, I smile and I rejoice greatly in the Lord. It's like, wow, God rebuilt their lives. It's just so powerful to see that happen. And again, just let that sink in. For Trinity Hill, to see ourselves as a community of grace. It's a beautiful thing, a community of grace. Third and last, note what Jesus asks and what he tells Peter to do. What does he ask and what does he tell Peter to do? Hak Jun Lee says, in a way, these questions were Peter's final exam before graduation. Peter had finished 3 years of education from Jesus, like he had gone to seminary. He had supervised ministry on various occasions by Jesus. He studied pastoral care by helping Jesus with the sick. And when Jesus said, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter was the one who gave the right answer. "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," right? He had explored ethical questions. How many times do I have to forgive the enemy? Following this education, Jesus tests Peter with a final exam question. So simple, just one question. Do you love me? Do you love me? Each time Peter answered affirmatively, Jesus directed Peter's attention to ministry, to serving others. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. Listen carefully. Jesus equated Peter's love of Jesus with Peter's ministry for Jesus. Again, he pulled together Peter's love for Jesus with Peter's ministry for Jesus. The crucial question that we need to be looking at as priests is the same question. The same question. Do you love me? He says to you today, do you love me? We as priests doing ministry, and I say priests because Peter, you see, was considered to be the first priest. Peter calls the church a nation of priests, okay? The Reformed tradition makes a big thing of this. We're all priests. We're all priests in the Reformed tradition. That's the emphasis of it. We all have that priestly role. And it points to the ultimate foundation of and the reason for all of our ministry as Christians, as priests, for the I'm a nation of priests. We do ministry. Why? Because we love Jesus. That's why we do it. Because we love Jesus. What is the first and great commandment? You're not telling me, but think, right? What is the first and great commandment? That you love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your mind, your soul, that you love him. And now Jesus says to us, do you love me? That's the ground for all our ministry. If it's not there, then our ministry is haywire. Because we love Jesus. It's a heart deal. It's a heart deal. It gives us the qualification to do ministry, to care for others, to do agape love. Do we love Jesus with our heart, all our heart, soul, and mind? Because we love Jesus, we do his work. We do ministry. We are priests. Because we love Jesus, we love others. And they will know we are Christians by our love. In closing, Jesus asked you, and he asked me, our final exam question. Okay, just one question. Do you love me? Do you love me? That's his question. And if you do, then feed my sheep. Do ministry.